Chapter 8, Maze Gate. In unconscious imitation of the ancient madness of Wulfstar Sunsore, the ferryman stood, wrapped in his ruby cloak at the lip of the Stargate. Even though the Akari had reclaimed the Stargate, few visited there except in ceremonial occasions, and Orr was alone in the circular chamber. Blue light chased about the dome, and the sound of the universe roared through, demanding, seductive, entreating. Orr ignored all of it. "There! Again!" he whispered, and trembled. "Again!" There was a sound beyond that of the star dance, beyond that of the interstellar winds of the universe. A whisper, but a whisper of many voices. Maddened voices, demanding voices. Orr shivered. What was it? This ravening pack of voices. Who were they? Why did they cry so? What did they want? And again he said, his hands tightening about his cloak, "Who are they to disturb the peace of the stars so?" "They claim to be my judgment, friend ferryman." Orr jumped so badly he almost fell into the Stargate. A hand closed about his arm, steadying him. Orr turned to see who had surprised him, then squealed in terror and stumbled back several paces. Wulfstar! Was anyone safe about the Stargate with this renegade present? "Peace, ferryman," Wulfstar said. "I am not the same madman who cast so many children to their deaths." Orr was not so sure. Could 4,000 years abate such madness? Wulfstar may have assisted Axis Sunsore's defeat of Gorgrail, but Orr's fear of him was still strong. He carefully backed away yet farther. Wulfstar ignored him and stepped over to the Stargate. Its pulsing blue light washed over his face, turning his copper curls almost as violet as his eyes. For several minutes he stood silent, tense. Then his shoulders relaxed slightly, and he gave Orr a small, humorless smile. "They call themselves my judgment," he said again, "but they are yet far away. We are safe. They will never find the Stargate again." "They?" Orr said. "They? I hear voices, many voices, and they are angry voices. There is," he searched for the right word, "there is a pack of them." Wulfstar's eyes narrowed. "A pack, ferryman?" "They hunt," Orr said very quietly, beginning to understand. "They hunt for you." He was silent briefly, turning a sudden thought over in his mind. "They are those you murdered." Wulfstar's mouth twisted slightly, and he looked back into the Stargate. "Yes," he said, "they yearn for my blood, and perhaps I do not blame them. But I am safe. They do not have the power or the skills to find their way back through the Stargate. They will drift for eternity, calling my name." He did not seem distressed at the thought of what he'd condemned the children to. I have never heard them before, or walked closer to the Stargate, but he still kept a prudent distance from Wulfstar. Wulfstar shrugged slightly. They knew I would die eventually, and that, as all enchanter talons, I would step through the Stargate for my eternal rest. So they drift on the interstellar winds, looking for me. This is the first time they've drifted this close to the Stargate. "But you evaded them before. You stepped back through into this world." "Yes, I did. When I died and then stepped through, the children were in a far part of the universe, utterly lost. Before they drifted back my way, I found the knowledge in death that returned me to life." That was only a mild lie on Wulfstar's part. In truth, the power that had allowed him to return had actively sought him out. Orr accepted Wulfstar's words. He had no doubt the enchanter never wanted to re-encounter the hundreds of children, or his own wife, whom he had hurled to their deaths. There was a movement in the shadow of one of the archways that circled the chamber, and both Wulfstar and Orr turned toward it. Salem Sunsore, star son of Tensendor, stepped into the light. "Well, lonely wolf of the night," he said softly, his gaze fixed on Wulfstar. "It has been over 40 years since you peered into my cradle, and then crushed Morningstar's head for the temerity of witnessing. 40 years for you to work your mischief. I know of you, Wulfstar. You can accomplish a great deal in 40 years. Wolfstar sat down in the low wall of the Stargate, unperturbed by Salem's abrupt appearance. His golden wings spread out to either side of his body, and he tilted his head quizzically, looking Salem up and down. The intervening years have grown a great man, he decided, and power sits him easily. And yet Wolfstar wondered if Salem had yet learned the power it would take to best him. He grinned. He doubted it. "Well?" Salem snapped, irritated by Wolfstar's demeanor. "Well, what?" "Wolfstar." All three in the chamber heard it. Wolfstar leapt off the wall and across the chamber in a single bound, and Salem's eyes narrowed, so frightened. "Wolfstar? Why? Why?" "We're coming. We're coming. We hunger." "They're lying," Wolfstar said, recovering his poise. "Bluffing. They cannot come through." There was a sound in the chamber, unusual, but rather like a flock of birds sweeping through the sky. Salem locked eyes with Orr momentarily, sharing knowledge, and then turned his gaze back to Wolfstar. "And how can you be so sure? If you could step back through the gate, then why can't they?" Orr faded back underneath one of the arches. He wanted nothing to do with the confrontation between these two. Wolfstar stared at Salem before he answered. "You want answers, Star Son? Then I will give you some. But not here." "Not here where they can hear you, Wolfstar? What is it that you have brought upon Tensendor now, renegade?" Salem took a step forward, but Wolfstar only smiled at the implied threat. No one could touch him, except, perhaps, "I have a fancy to see my grandchildren, and a fancy to see what you have made of Sighold," he said, forcing his mind away from what else might be accompanying the children. "We're coming. We're coming. We hunger. And pray all the gods in creation it is only you who shout my name." "Wolfstar, I demand answers. Do you think I'm going to stand aside while your troubles tear Tensendor apart yet again?" "Sighold," said Wolfstar. "I will meet you and yours at Sighold." "When?" "Soon. A day." "Wait." And then he vanished. Salem took a deep breath. Stars. What was going on? He peered into the Stargate, becoming one with the star dance briefly, then shook himself and looked at Orr, still secreted in the shadows. "Have you heard these voices before?" Orr shook his head. "Today was the first time, Star Son. They are not strong, and perhaps to be expected. Wolfstar murdered some 212 enchanters, including Starlaughter and the child she carried. I can well imagine that their souls have drifted 4,000 years seeking vengeance. Pray their vengeance is directed only at Wolfstar. I shall throw the enchanter through myself if it will appease their need," Salem said. "I think I will ask Wingridge to mount a guard here. I would not like us to be surprised." "No need," said the ferryman. "I shall stand watch." Wolfstar stood before the gate to the maze, not the Stargate. Its wooden doors were closed, thankfully. Wolfstar hoped to be far, far away if they ever opened. Did anything else follow those voices toward the Stargate? His hands drifted over the strange inscription on the stone archway surrounding the gate. It had taken him many years to understand this language, the language of the ancients, or the enemy as their enemies referred to them. The enemy that had crashed through from the universe so many millennia ago, creating the Stargate, leaving behind its deadly cargo. He silently cursed and concentrated on the inscription. Yes, there and there. Star Son, as it had been for the past 40 years. For 3,000 years before, that inscription had only mentioned the vague term Crusader, but a year after the birth of Salem, the maze had changed its mind and substituted Star Son for Crusader. Now the symbol of Star Son trumpeted forth again and again, leaping from the gate's inscription. This time the maze was certain. Well might it be. It was the maze which had taught Wulfstar the prophecy of the destroyer, and then commanded him to write it down and do all in his power to ensure its eventual realization. After he defeated Gorgrail, Axis had asked Wulfstar if the prophecy was nothing but idiot gabble for his own amusement. Then Wulfstar had hedged. He'd said that certain knowledges had come to him beyond the Stargate that made his return imperative. True enough. However, it was not the prophecy itself that had persuaded him back through the Stargate, but rather the prophecy's true author, the maze. The prophecy had a very clear and direct purpose. It had nothing at all to do with protecting Tensendor from Gorgrail. Its only purpose had been to breed the champion the maze needed, the Crusader. Wulfstar had always assumed that the Crusader would be Axis, but the maze had never named him. Instead, it had chosen Axis and Azur's son, Salem. Wulfstar nodded. Of course. He should have realized that the Crusader would need both Axis's and Azur's blood. Then a chill swept through Wulfstar. If the Crusader had been born, and was now named by the maze, it meant the hour of need must be nigh. What else followed those voices toward the Stargate? He had 3,000 years to prepare himself for this moment, and yet Wulfstar wished he had 60 more 3,000 years. Star Sun, Star Sun, Star Sun, the inscription about the maze screamed, "Aid me now!" Wulfstar turned very slightly so he could see the row upon row of seated birdmen and birdwomen behind him. There were hundreds of them, seated in orderly ranks, slowly swaying from side to side in perfect unison as they regarded the gate with part reverence, part fear, and part love. "Are you true?" Wulfstar asked softly. "True to the Star Sun," replied the hundreds of voices. On each of their chests glowed a golden knot.